All right, John, take it away.
Thank you, Jen. We've agreed, Jen and I, that we will, as co-chairs, we'll be alternating chairing the meetings. So I drew the short straw today. So I will play that role. And also, just to make sure everyone's familiar, I think everyone's getting more and more practice with Zoom. But if you want to be able to see everybody at the same time, there's usually a button in your upper right-hand corner of the window, which will allow you to choose either speaker view or gallery. Speaker view should have the person who's speaking highlighted. If you have a gallery, you can see everybody at the same time. So I don't know how many non-committee member citizens we may have dialing in. So it may be possible you've got to kind of swipe your screen to the side if number of faces exceed 20. But it's good to see everybody made it in. That's great. Thank you. So as you know, the town is, everything's a bit up in the air. And in most committee meetings have been canceled for the foreseeable future. And the town's preference is that only essential standing committees continue to meet. But the select board has decided that given the importance of coordinating kind of a response to COVID by all the businesses in the town, we want to keep this committee meeting. So we were really pleased to have that support, and thanks for making yourselves available relatively last minute. We are going to have a discussion as to how frequently we should be meeting, but we'll do that later on. But we kind of roughed this meeting together a couple of days ago, so I just want to go through a few administrative things. I mentioned the fact that Jennifer and I will be kind of trading off on chair duties. We've talked about the Zoom meeting parameters. If anyone has questions or suggestions as to how we can make this even better, we're always open to those. Next on the agenda, I had approval of minutes. I don't think we have any minutes to approve quite yet, but Ms. Lauer, you are here. And yeah. How would you like us to handle minutes on a go-forward basis?
I have submitted, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes.
I have submitted draft minutes to Cato, and he marked them up. I then returned them to Cato, and he was going to be responsible for circulating with the agenda at a regular meeting, and I didn't know if this was necessarily a regular meeting. So the process I used was draft to Cato, Cato comment, and then to the committee.
Okay. So I think that's a good process for our next meeting. Cato, you'll just distribute to the committee in advance. That sounds great. I see that Cato is not shaving. My kids decided on Sunday that I should grow a beard as well. So in 2 weeks, I may look a bit shaggier. We'll see.
Still working on it, John. It's not coming along very well, though.
Well, it's only been 3 days.
I woke up in the middle of the night last night scratching away, so mine might not be too long for the world either.
I've never had a beard in my life.
I mean, yeah, it's my first one. It's a little too gray down here.
It looks pretty good. Okay, so the next bullet I had on the agenda was committee membership. We talked last time about recruiting a couple of more members as we had a couple open seats. And I know that I had reached out to Ramon Carrion from Fiorella's, who was enthusiastic about joining the committee. He submitted a green card, I believe, but I have no idea what's happened with that. Susan, have you had any nominations?
John?
Where are we? Yes.
John, can I just say something? Greg Higgins here. You have a caller on a phone that tries to keep getting in. We may need to give that person instructions as to how to talk. They keep lighting up on my screen, which I think is an indication that they're trying to say something. I think they go *9 is the answer.
They are unmuted right now, so I can go ahead and mute them. They have permission to talk. They're probably just making noise in the background.
Okay. By the way, just a quick introduction. That was Jeremy who just spoke. Jeremy is on the town staff and is the one who set up this meeting for us. So I would imagine that Jeremy, it's great to have you here, Jeremy. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for the introduction.
Jeremy can help us all.
John, I have some feedback on the nomination. Tomorrow at the select board meeting, we're going to nominate Ramon for membership on the Economic Vitality Committee. He'll be appointed at the subsequent meeting. So he won't be allowed to vote until he's sworn in, which was when the townhouse reopens. But in the meantime, he's certainly welcome to participate in the discussion. He just won't be able to be a decision maker.
Okay. Thank you. And I think that means we'll have one more seat still open. I had spoken to Helen Brady, who was another person we talked about at the last meeting. Helen would love to be involved. Apparently, she's also on the audit committee.
She's on the, no, it's, let's see. It has to do with elections. There's a committee that,
I think she's the registrar.
for the elections. I know she's at Kari is, there are 3 or 4 members. Kari is one, and Helen
Is
Brady is another.
The Board of Registrars.
Yeah.
Okay. So apparently she can't serve on 2 committees at the same time. So I would encourage everyone to think about other candidates that we might consider, and I guess send any suggestions to the chairs, and we'll run those by the select board. Okay. Okay, next on the agenda, amended charge. Susan, do you want to explain
Yes.
the decision that was taken at the most recent select board meeting?
Yes, at the most recent select board meeting, in the category under duties, we added the following: explore and recommend methods the town and community can take to support local businesses during the emergency and recovery. Now, I will amend the charge and circulate it amongst you. I just hadn't gotten to that yet, but that's the wording.
And do you want to just provide a little background on, why that action was taken?
Yes, there were some discussions with Mike Lawson and I think Stephen Crane and a number of the business community, including the Concord Business Partnership and some other merchants who were concerned about the situation. And I suggested at a prior select board meeting that this committee would be a good group to be able to grapple with the issues that businesses are facing. So with all that taken into account, the select board decided to amend the charge to allow the committee to continue its work and specifically to address this current situation.
That's great. So thank you. We appreciate that. Any questions about that modification to the charge from committee members? Okay, good. Okay, so now I think we get to kind of the body of the agenda. And
Hey, John, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So Susan, I understand sort of the amended charge. What is the pathway back? In other words, if the committee comes up with 2 or 3 ideas, is it to you as the liaison? Is it to the select board? Is it to Stephen as the town manager? What's the process as far as feedback going back the other way to the town?
Well, I guess you could forward the suggestions either to me or to the entire select board and CC Stephen. Ultimately, the suggestions would be made to the select board. So if you want to just send them directly to the entire board, that would be fine. Or I can be an intermediary.
Mark, we have an item called brainstorm on the agenda, and I think that's where we want to focus the bulk of our conversation today. And that's really around what do we want to do and how do we want to do it in light of this kind of the new COVID crisis. So it's a good question. Let's take it up. Stephen.
Yeah, just if you look at the original charge, it is, I think, advisory to the town manager and select board. So it would be recommendations to us.
Okay. Good.
But I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ruth.
I would suggest that, John, that is, the committee is advising. Individuals are not going to be acting other than as the committee, if I'm correct.
Can you clarify that?
Well, if I were on this committee, I would not start calling the members of the Board of Selectmen and give them my ideas. It would be the committee that would call the Board of Selectmen and give them ideas.
Correct. I agree with that.
Right. Thank you.
We're acting as a body. Thank you. Okay, so next on the next item on the budget on the agenda is tax relief. The town has taken a fairly significant step on the tax relief front, and I watched the meeting on Zoom, so I could speak to it. But Susan or Stephen, would one of you like to explain the vote of the select board related to payment of property taxes?
Stephen, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure, Susan. So basically, there's under federal law, the state law. The state passed a kind of an omnibus municipal relief package that includes a bunch of stuff, but it also allowed to either extend the deadline for tax payments and or waive fees and waive fines and penalties for late payment of taxes. And after getting guidance from our assessor Lane Partridge, our chief financial officer Carrie LaFleur, and me, after kind of looking at the package, the board decided to adopt the provision that waives late fees and fines, or fines and penalties for late payments versus extending the deadline. But we did say at the meeting, if your individual situation isn't aided by that, then you should reach out to the finance to Kerry or Lane, to see what we can do to help individual situations. But basically for revenue generation for the town, so the town can continue to meet its expenses and provide service back to the community, we decided to keep the deadline where it was.
So I had a couple of questions, and others may have questions. I'm just curious, first of all, how many folks have heard about that vote and were aware of this policy change? Cato? No? Okay. So I guess one question I had, Stephen, was how does the town plan to go about publicizing this important?
I did include it in the script of my robocall that went to 70% of the phones in town.
I also included it in an email.
Yeah.
To all of our members, and then some.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do we have any idea as to how many people you think may take advantage of it?
I'm sorry, we also put it out on social media as well, and it was also on the town's website in the news and notices.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think, John, this is, even in times of non-crisis, the town has a limited toolbox in terms of notifications, and we've been using virtually every single one we have to communicate messages during this time where, like in a normal time, we maybe wouldn't use code red to get out information like that, but because of the crisis and the quickly shifting nature of it, we have been using that. But I think it's hard to tell right now, and this is one of those things where we just don't know. And when we call these unprecedented times, the only thing we could look at for an analogy would be 2007, 8, 9, the last kind of major economic crisis. And Carrie LaFleur did do an analysis. I don't have it in front of me, but Concord, fortunately, has a very high collection rate for property taxes. I mean, like in the high 90s. And so during 7, 8, and 9, the collection rate was impacted very minimally, which, like I said, I think is one of the strengths of this community is its ability to pay and its commitment to paying its taxes. But this is a very different type of crisis. This is not an economic crisis. And so, quite frankly, there's no model to go back and look at to project how many people will be impacted by this. This is going to be specifically one of the things we're going to figure out as we go.
So I guess on that point, Stephen, I guess that the focus, I guess, of a lot of people on this phone call as well as this committee is sort of retail and commercial property owners. Did Carrie do any analysis as to what that commercial base looked like and, how collections were followed through in 08 and 09? Because I think that's misleading. I mean, if the commercial rate is something between 6 and 8% of the tax base, I think that it may be skewed when you're talking about high 90s collections for a period of time where, you could have a scenario where landlords aren't collecting any rent for 25 to 33% of the year.
So Mark, I'll have to see if I can find that and look at it. If you just give me a minute, if you guys want to keep talking, I can find it in my emails and take a look at it.
So then are there any other questions or comments on the tax relief policy? Okay. So Stephen, let us know if you have anything else you want to share.
I do have one quick question. So that talked about property tax. What about any sort of tax on assets of organizations? Was that discussed at all?
I'm sorry, can you just identify yourself who that was speaking?
Sorry, this is Jennifer speaking.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, okay. I was just asking if there's any discussion around, the personal property taxes on the assets of different companies, or did that not come up in the discussion?
The focus was really on property taxes. I mean, she did, we're looking at revenue estimates for meals, lodging, which are obviously taking a significant hit. I don't know about personal property taxes or motor vehicle excise taxes, but obviously the bulk of our budget is built on property taxes.
Okay.
Right. I don't know, John, in sort of in the same context of steps that the town has taken, I'd love to hear a little bit more about Beth's role. I was really encouraged to see her appointed as a sort of information contact for some of the businesses.
Sure. So I can let you know what sort of on the interim, what I've been tasked with. So what we did sort of on the economic impact, I was able to reach out to all the businesses and offer town support for filling out loan applications. So under Stephen's leadership and Care LaFleur's leadership, myself, Brandon, and John Harris have gone through the applications. We took one business and did a trial run of doing the application ourselves. I've talked to Middlesex Bank. We've talked to some of the other local banks to figure out what their processes are for the different loans. We updated the business resource page on the town's website. Sorry, I just lost the internet for a second. Okay. The internet is a little unstable sometimes. So we updated the town website with a list of business resources. And right now, businesses reach out to me if they have a question. And then I sort of have taken turns assigning them to either John or Brandon or answering the question myself if I'm able to. The first day we put that out last Monday, and we've helped about a dozen businesses that have taken advantage of reaching out and asking for assistance with any of the loans. So it's just a nice way for me to be able to keep in touch with the businesses and for us as a town to be able to offer whatever services we can. Obviously, we can't make any determination for them, but we can help them with FAQs, best practices and what we're hearing in terms of how people have gone through the process for the loans. Does that help, Jen?
Yeah, I mean, I do want to just follow up a little bit, and this is somewhat of a technical point, but Beth is doing this kind of on I say voluntary basis, but because a lot of her normal duties are kind of on hold because there isn't tourism or visitors, she's offering to do this, but we don't currently have an economic vitality coordinator, and that role wouldn't start until the FY21 budget is adopted and implemented. So I just want to so she's helping out, but it's not a formalized economic vitality coordinator role at this time. It's just something that she's doing, as a gesture of goodwill, I think. And I think many of you know her, but you probably couldn't pick Brandon Roberts out of a lineup. So it's helpful to have a familiar face to go to first.
That's much appreciated, Beth. Thank you.
Happy to do it.
Yeah, so I guess to Stephen and to Bethany, just, we own property in other towns. And I would say that Concord should be applauded for getting ahead of this, both from the select people thinking about upcoming taxes, as well as having someone inside of the government, if you will, willing to assist even on a voluntary way. So I think it's great that Concord is doing this. And I can tell you firsthand that there are other towns who are not. So it is appreciated.
I really appreciate hearing that, Mark. I mean, I'm glad my wife isn't on this call because she would tell you that I don't really listen, but we really do try and hear you. And when you made a pretty easy standalone ask of, is there somebody that you could appoint to be a point of contact? Sure. Let's find somebody. We got plenty of people around. So I appreciate you saying that, Mark. I don't know that we've figured it all. I don't know if you watch the select board meeting, I have been absolutely wearing out the analogy of building the airplane on the fly. But as we are really starting to, hit the surge for cases and think about, okay, what's on the backside of this, I actually think dismantling it may even be more complex. And that's something that we're trying to be mindful of. And I don't even know, I mean, there's a million people we're going to have to engage with, our federal legislative delegation, our state legislative delegation, any higher ed institutions that have insight on economic trends and are kind of monitoring this closely and collecting data to figure out where things are going. But we're going to stay at it, but we're going to need even more patience, I think, on reentry than we did on closure, because closure was relatively simple. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out, that we've got some work to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Stephen. Next on the agenda, we have COVID business questionnaire. A number of us, I guess I would start by saying that I'm really impressed with how much energy there is in the community to rally to the support of our businesses, retailers and restaurants in particular, being those which are kind of most obviously being forced to either shut down or completely transform the way they're doing business. And there's been a lot of kind of ad hoc conversations and groups that have been happening. Jennifer and I have both participated in a group that I think was originally set up by Jane O'Baggy, that was kind of being led by the Chamber, but also by Sharon Spalding, who's a member of the Concord Business Partnership. And on a recent call, there was a suggestion made that the town should help coordinate a survey of local businesses to understand exactly how they're being impacted by COVID. So that, when I say we, I mean the town, I mean private citizens, I mean the Chamber of Commerce, the Concord Business Partnership, can figure out the best ways to support businesses through this time. And those calls have been really actually interesting because, as I said, there's a ton of energy for supporting businesses, but no one's quite sure what to do. And so the idea of a survey is to at least get some initial data on how businesses are being impacted, so that, we can think through the right response, the right forms of support. One of the obvious things is that, Concordians should be encouraged to patronize their local businesses to the greatest extent they can right now. That support at the end of the day is what's most important. But we want to have some data to inform some of that thinking on what kind of solutions might be undertaken. And so to that end, I just wanted to raise the idea with this group and offer to share a draft of that survey after the call. What Jennifer and I thought we could do is email it around to the committee and also post it on the town's website at the same time, so it's something that everybody has access to. But the hope would be that we could get that figured out in the next few days and begin getting it in circulation, so that we begin to get data back next week. And this kind of morphs into the next subject, but it really gets at the question as to how we want to conduct our activities here, whether the Economic Vitality Committee should be the one principally responsible for taking actions, or do we want to serve as kind of a clearinghouse or a coordinator of others who might take action? And I'll give you an example. This group that I mentioned is kind of calling itself Concord Together. It may be better for a non-governmental group to be actually taking actions than for a town committee, which may have all kinds of strings attached just by necessity when it comes to open meeting law and all kinds of other things. But so I think the first question on this brainstorm that I want to get a discussion going around is what do we want to be doing and how do we want to do it? Because at our last meeting, we came up with this very elegant plan for putting together a list of important topics for business in Concord. And we would attack each topic, 1 month at a time. And we would recruit the relevant experts to kind of join our meetings, for those discussions. And we kind of, Cato was going to be gathering a list of topics, and I imagine all of us sent in ideas, but that was before this COVID thing happened, right? So it almost seems like we can put that on hold for a period of time because, this new bullet that's been added to our charge really feels like the priority right now. So we really wanted to have a brainstorm around, how do the members of this committee think we should be conducting ourselves, and what do we want to be focused on? Jennifer, why don't you? Is that a good kind of introduction, or how you want to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, John, I think one of the core challenges that we have is that this is a crisis, right? So we have to act quickly where we can, but we also need to abide by open meeting laws and the normal procedure. So I guess the sort of touch point we want to discuss is there is a lot of very exciting momentum happening in the private sector. This group, Concord Together, has discussed and actually already created, for example, a YouTube channel where any business can create a little video about what they're doing, what they're offering, and upload it to this YouTube channel, where that can then be pushed out as an umbrella organization or an umbrella marketing initiative through various channels. The survey is another great idea to help provide some baseline information and to guide at least the private sector response to how to best help businesses. There's also some discussions around, creating special events or collaborative ideas to help incentivize Concordians and others to patronize Concord businesses. I think as a baseline and something that we could do quickly as a committee, particularly if Beth is open to this, is just ensure that as the various members of this committee, who of course are also involved in other efforts, become aware of programs that could help or support the businesses, if we could forward links to that information to Beth to at least just post up on that town site of resources that are available. I'm not sure if there needs to be a vetting process or not, But that's something quick and simple that we could certainly do to help ensure that any sort of assistance is available in a consolidated venue. But I think John raised a really good point in that if we as a committee, and I think there will be some programs that we should lead, by necessity that timeline is longer in order to gain consensus and provide the timeline needed for feedback. So we'd really love to hear other people's ideas on what is the appropriate balance between the sort of town shepherded activities that go through those channels, and at the same time ensuring that anything that is happening in the private sector at least is communicated through town channels to help the businesses. So does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I can let you know that the new tourism website is live, effective today. So it's still in tweaking phase. So it's not final, it's still a living document. We did push it out live today. So it is visitconcord.org. And I did create a COVID page, and I'd been sending out messages through the chamber, through the business partnership, and through my list to get listings. We offered all businesses in Concord a free listing for the website, as well as there's the COVID page that they can list what they're offering right now. So if you look at it, the COVID page links both to the town website of resources, and it also has a listing of what businesses are doing and anything special right now. It's in its infancy. We're not like promoting it to the larger world until it's been fully vetted. My staff at Rec is doing a really good job of scrubbing it for links that are broken or not working, or but I felt like it needed to go live. So that page, so the fact that I love that there's a YouTube channel, but that's the first I've heard of it. So I don't know who's running that, but I think I can link to that from my website. We're also going to support the site launch with promotion via Facebook and some SEO and Google Ads in the coming weeks on a small scale, just to sort of get the word out. And we'll be looking for businesses to help us cross-promote it so that we can not invest a ton financially in putting it out there, but just making it a resource to the town and its members. So that's one resource that everybody should feel free to use. Look at it. Let me know what's wrong with it. I'm sure it's not perfect, but it is beautiful. The company did a fantastic job with the design, and I'm really pleased with it overall. So that's a resource that everybody should take advantage of as soon as possible. It's very easy to use for me on the back end to add things. So I'm happy to take changes, recommendations, listings, special events, all can go on there.
That's fantastic, Beth, and I will happily push access over to that page from Discover Concord Magazine's page as well. I'm really glad to hear that you have that listing for the businesses. So any way that we can help you promote or cross-link, very happy to do that.
Thank you.
So I guess my thinking is that, I think the question earlier was, think about what your position is regarding the role of this committee. And so I guess what I think the role of this committee, or one of the roles should be, is to sort of act as intermediary, a channel between businesses, whether it be landlords, retailers, you name it, hospitals, whomever, and the selectman and town manager. So if we think about what the crisis is today and when the crisis lifts, and I guess it's going to lift when Governor Baker decides it will lift, when you talk about survey information, you're talking about information such as sales and projected sales, and sort of getting to a point where people will try to be able to avoid surprises. So what I mean by that is, if we are shut down for 4 months, then it should come as no surprise to the town assessor that there's either going to be a flood of abatements or there's going to be a problem with businesses paying their taxes. So one of my questions, or I guess one of the things I want to throw on the table, is now the opportunity to reach out to our constituencies, whether it be through the partnership, the Chamber of Commerce, whatever channels we have, to find out where the pain points are today, including relief from PPP and other loans. And when it's finally lifted, what the plan is from those business peoples to move forward. And most importantly, how we can educate the townspeople to start patronizing and supporting those businesses under the parenthetical problem that if they don't support those businesses may not be around next time this year. Or this time next year. So I guess when you talk about a survey, what are we trying to survey? And then what are we trying to do with that information? And what I would propose is that we have sort of information relevant to where we are today and when the veil of COVID lifts vis-a-vis, other businesses can open, not only essential, but all businesses, how we can help navigate that.
Steve?
I was just trying to put together the pieces of us being an advisory committee. And could we advise the selectmen or recommend to the selectmen that they delegate our committee to take an action? Or how would that work? We talk about doing various action things, but then we're advisory.
So you're asking whether we would be allowed to actually take actions, or are we limited to suggesting?
Well, if the selectmen could tell us to take an action, select board.
I can try and answer that. I think, Steve, it would depend on what type of action you were contemplating. But generally, it's just if it's a service or a decision or a other type of task that the local government would provide, then the committee would say to either me or the select board, hey, here's what we think you should do in this situation. And then we would likely do it.
I was just trying to decide whether we should take any word that implied action out of our conversation, because that's not part of the possibilities.
Yeah, I think it's more stimulate action, maybe. I think the thing is, there's the economic, like all boards and committees, there's a scope that you have, a charge
right,
that you look at in a narrow way, which is appropriate. And then the select board and the town manager and the whole town organization takes all of those individual charges and efforts and then balances out all of them across the board. So, to meet the needs of the community broadly. And so if one group kind of gets outside of that and it becomes a disproportionate level of action or interaction, it can disrupt the balance that the organization is trying to strike for the community, which, as I noted, the fulcrum where we find balance in this situation has completely moved from where it would normally be.
okay.
So Stephen, in a situation like the survey we're discussing, that survey is actually being talked about with the chamber, with the business partnership, with this Concord Together group. Could the recommendation from this advisory committee be to make that survey accessible via a town communication channel to invite a higher level of participation, rather than trying to make this an official town survey, just that there is a survey happening in the community, and if the town would like to make that available, then that data can be shared back to the town for future information? Or is that already outside the scope of what we should be discussing?
So should this be a town survey or something that's generated by the business community? Is that just to make sure I understand your question?
I think as of now, it is something that's being discussed in the business community, but that several of the groups behind it would like to make it available through the town if that is appropriate.
Yeah,
This is where we're
yeah, I
hitting
mean,
at what's appropriate for us to do. Question that Steve had.
yeah, I mean, I think just in terms of like what the town, like how the town is promoting, for lack of a better term, we do have essential businesses, listed on the website as kind of that's really, I think those businesses will hopefully benefit from being on that listing, but that really is a service to residents, so they know where they can go. In terms of the survey, I think us carrying links to it, or even hosting it is fine. I just didn't know if either the chamber or the business partnership wanted to, or both wanted to kind of be the leader of that, because it really is a dialogue in and amongst business people. But we're happy to host it. I just didn't know. I really want to take my cues, I think, from the business community, see what you all felt was, who should be leading that charge. But certainly we can promote it through the website. Sure. I think it's going to be essential data that we're going to need to, as like I said, dismantle that airplane.
So then an appropriate action of this committee might be to recommend that the town make accessible a survey that's being developed by the business community?
Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I was speaking for Greg, and this is Cato speaking for Greg, but I think that something like this coming from the business partnership might be a great thing for people to see it sort of separate from the town, coming from the business community trying to support each other.
This is Greg. You beat me to it, Cato. I totally agree. I think that the key here is speed. I think it has to get out there as soon as possible, and so we can get the results back in the data to go forward. I also think that we've got to think about what are other communities doing in terms of getting prepared for going back to some kind of normalcy, and that's going to take a little bit of a work up. And I don't know is that a Beth thing? Is that a chamber thing? Who is going to do that? I don't know whether Stephen that's something you talk with your other town managers about, like what's going on. How do you plan on activating the business community? You'd ask that of all your colleagues, but getting the survey out, I think, promptly is very important. And if it has to come from, we will need the town site, I think, to promote access to it. But other than that, I think the partnership or the chamber could be or do a co-sponsorship, of course.
So I wasn't able to go to the meeting a couple of Mondays ago, but I guess my question, Jennifer, is that how can we best formulate the survey so it's empowering and incentivizing those businesses who are filling it out? Because we can tell you from the partnership perspective, we've sent out surveys and our response rates are disappointingly low. So if we're going to spend the time and energy to have a survey, I think we should figure out how the information is going to be used. And then secondly, really empower people, incentivize people to contribute and to help them formulate part of the solution or recommendations, which we hopefully will come up with.
I think you raise a really good point, Mark, and surveys in general, I think, are largely ignored. I'm hoping that given the urgency of the situation, that we will see a little bit of a higher response. However, some of the questions that we're asking are pretty delicate questions. Anticipated revenues, number of employees, do you hope to keep them, add, subtract, etc. This is private information for a lot of the organizations. So I think you raise a really good point. Not everyone will respond. Perhaps we need to think about, how will that data be used? How will it be shared, etc. But in terms of what this committee can do, perhaps we simply want to make the recommendation to the select board and the town manager that when a survey is available that is a collaboration between the business partnership and the chamber, that we could forward that survey to the town and request that they make it available. I don't know that this committee would have the authority even to decide what would happen with that data, other than it would be shared back with the town. But you raise a really good point. How do we incentivize people to answer? I think part of it is simply feeling like someone's listening in a time of crisis. But I would definitely include some open-ended questions, which are, what are the top 3 things the town could do for you right now to help you weather the crisis, and leave it a bit more open-ended, try to gather information that way. Mm-hmm. How else would the rest of you incentivize people?
Well, I think this is Greg Higgins. I think as far as the partnership is concerned, we could work through the landlords to educate their tenants. I do think that the survey probably has to be an anonymous response, and it might have something at the end that says, should you need any assistance, the town has avenues, please go to this point in the website. But I think a lot of businesses would be very reluctant to put their name on some of the answers to the questions. So I think we need data, and if it has to be anonymous, that's the best data we have, but at least it's something we can work with and get more responses by keeping it anonymous. That's just my feeling.
John, can I jump in on that?
Yep.
So, Greg, I think because this is a committee appointed by the select board, obviously any documents we exchange are by and large public record. And so if we do want businesses to really fully disclose and give us an accurate, summary of where they are, but that data is sensitive, then that speaks to either the chamber or the business partnership or both collecting that information and then analyzing that data and reporting it back to the town.
I agree.
So the other part is, I guess, so in terms of like, how are we going to decide how we're going to reopen? I can tell you that it's going to look a lot like the restriction on non-essential businesses. The governor is going to take the lead on it. And I think that that's been pretty clear. And I think I watched, he usually does daily press conferences, but he was asked about this at the one yesterday. And he said, we're going to be really careful, and we're going to, we're not just going to flip a switch. It's going to be planned very carefully, and not, it's going to depend, I think, a lot about COVID case data and rates of growth and all those other things. So we don't even know what that's going to look like. And to be honest with you, I think we're 4 to 6 weeks away from any of that stuff really even happening anyway, unfortunately. So,
Stephen, I was not talking about the actual function of how the governor would release his authority over us and let us go back to business, but what are other communities in terms of how they plan on, are they going to have a week-long hoopla once it's released, and are they going to spend more time on educating their retailers as to smart ways of protecting their employees and the customers? What are other communities doing and planning for to make it as smooth and as, obviously healthy return to business and the quickest way to do it? Obviously you can say shop locally, but if people have no faith in how it's being handled, and even no matter what the governor says, it would be irrelevant. There may be communities out there that are ahead of us, in other words, in thinking this through.
So I can tell you, Greg, and I apologize to everyone else for the colloquy here with Greg and I, but I can tell you that I don't believe that to be the case, because no community has the answers they need to really decide what the strategy is going to be, because the governor hasn't decided it, and we don't have data on. We're still figuring out what are the impacts. We won't really. I mean, in some cases, we aren't going to hear from businesses, and so when we get a clear signal, there are going to be businesses that just don't reopen, that we didn't know weren't going to reopen. And to some extent, that's how you're going to find out, I think, what are the impacts by people you never heard from and never asked for help. have just called it quits. And like I said, you won't know until all of a sudden everybody else opens their doors and they don't. I think, but the questions you just asked of how should we be doing this, that's the work of this committee. That's why this charge is being amended. And that's why I think it's important to get that good data from the business community. So at least, and like I said, I think, if you're filling out the survey and how do you incentivize people to doing it, my recommendation would be tell everyone that they're writing this to the governor. They need to tell their story by virtue of the survey to Charlie Baker. So he may end up getting the data, he may not, but that's really how people should visualize who they're really talking to, because that's where the decision making is going to start. And we can certainly convey that to the Commonwealth, but really that's the story that needs to be told, and that's the message that needs to be delivered is here's what's happened to us, and so now here are the things you can either do to help us or figure out what you can do to address the situation we're in.
So Greg, I'd like to take your question and kind of turn it into a proposal for the committee. You're asking, these questions, but what are other towns doing, et cetera. I think that understanding that is part of our role. And so I think that we should take kind of the to-do to stay abreast of what other communities are doing, right? So I think each of us should be kind of listening for what is the best practice, what's the current state of the art around preparing for reopening, right? And I don't know if we should kind of ask for a volunteer to be principally in charge of that, or if we should just kind of tell everyone in the committee it's our collective responsibility to tap our contacts and use our networks to listen to what other towns are doing. So for example, I happen to be involved with a similar group up in the town where we go in Maine. And that's a seasonal community. And a lot of those retailers are considering not even opening this season because they don't even know if people are going to be coming at all, right? But I'm hearing from them about some of the steps they're taking to try to pave the way for a smooth reopening, whatever that may be. They're also actually doing a survey. And this question about whether people will respond, Greg, I think that we'll have much higher response rates than we might have seen in the past, as long as it's clear that this survey is being undertaken specifically to identify ways to support the business community. So you are helping yourself by providing this data, because without it, it makes it kind of hard to craft solutions, right? So this little town up in Maine has had a tremendously high response from its Chamber of Commerce members to its survey. And I'm guessing we'll probably see the same here, but the points are well taken about making clear that it's anonymous, making clear that it's not the town that's capturing the data, but it's actually kind of, private organizations, and that the analysis will be happening in that way. But I think, to the question about, what are other towns doing? I think we should all be listening and sharing best practices. Jane, I'm sure you're talking to other chamber directors. Don, you probably, hear from folks in your network as to, what's working, what's not. And that's our whole mission here is to serve as a kind of a clearinghouse and a sounding board for good ideas, and then advising the town as to what we think will be most useful. So, Greg, to your question, I think the answer is let's all make sure that we are listening and gathering the best ideas we can find.
John, I apologize for jumping in again, but I do regularly communicate with other managers in the area about a whole host of topics, and we're not really engaged in this yet. The towns really aren't talking about reopening yet. But I know once we do, we will have that. Once we're there, we'll have that conversation, and I will share all those ideas. And you're right, get ideas from everywhere, and let's steal what is going to work for us. But it's just from a public administration standpoint, that's just not the space that managers are in right now.
Maybe what we could do. Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I wonder if we might have a more fruitful beginning survey if we leave off the number of employees and the dollars and go more with situations and what things could be changed to just make any business operate better, like maybe restaurant seating, whether a certain density or something, and neglect the information that might make people hesitate to fill it out, but more concentrate on issues that might be solved.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, one of the things that's happened in the last 2 weeks in our business is that, number one, the first of the month has come. Most importantly, the 10th of the month has come. Typically, there's a 10-day grace period for rent payments. Secondly, mortgages payment dates have started to happen. So personally, I've spent the last week with COVID-19 letters, whether those be agreements for deferral with banks or requests for COVID-19 related rent abatement from tenants. And although I don't have specific numbers for sales, I'm getting continuous letters that either say, we are closed, our operations are closed, it's zero, or we're down, pick a percentage, 95%. So in some regards, this is the time for landlords to have those conversations, because people are asking from anywhere from 50 to 100% rent deferrals or abatements. Typically it's a deferral right now from a landlord perspective, but we're starting to gather that information. So, one counterpoint to it, Steve, what you just said is that the information is starting to flow to us. And although we don't have to name a landlord, a tenant by name, we can sanitize it. And we can also use a percentage as opposed to an absolute.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, Greg Higgins here. Is it your suggestion that we gather this information through that we get the committee, I'm not on your committee, but that you get the word out that we're seeking this through the chamber or the partnership, whatever, to the landlords and ask the landlords to do the survey? You sort of send the survey to their people and report back? Is that what you're?
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, people are going to say, look, I'm happy to fill out a survey or provide some information to you, but unfortunately, how's it going to help me or my next door neighbor? So if it is known to people that the town cares about what's going on, the town has a committee that acts as a liaison, a feeder, an organizer, whatever you want to say. And the town is also, or the committee is also working with the Chamber of Commerce as well as the partnership, and that, steps are in motion to get information, relief, whatever. I think people will be more inclined to understand why they're being asked these questions and then how they can help themselves in the process. So as a landlord, I'm happy to send all of my tenants information saying, look, with regard to Concord, here's what's going on. Here's how the information can help. I'd love you to step up. If you don't want to give it to me, you can give it to so-and-so directly, no problem. But it's important that information be collected, because at the end of the day, it's going to be relevant to rents, to assessments, and ultimately to tax collection. And so my issue right now is avoid surprises. And there's going to be a massive surprise if in 3 quarters, a number of landlords aren't paying their bills and the assessor is scratching his head, or the collector is scratching his or her head as to why, when we could have told them 6 months earlier, the problem is coming. So that's my point. We know there's a problem. We don't know if it's a month, 3 months, 6 months, but there's definitely a problem. And I'm hoping this committee can be proactive and to address issues as of today in the hope that we can help condition, and avoid bad consequences, 6 to 12 months from now.
So can we maybe take this topic and formulate some sort of a motion that perhaps, and I know, John, this may tie to another topic we want to discuss, which is how often we meet, but perhaps between now and our next meeting, which hopefully is sooner rather than later, we could come to this committee with a draft survey, or even a survey that's already in motion in the private sector, because perhaps by then it will be, and put that survey forward to be recommended to the select board and the town manager to make available through town resources. And in the interim between now and then, via private sector channels, that survey can be refined. And then this committee could assess that survey at our next meeting and see if it seems appropriate to recommend to the town manager. Does that sound reasonable?
I guess my question, Jennifer, is mostly about timing. And you're right, we should talk about how often we want to meet. But I would think that those organizations might like to get that survey out sooner than even 2 weeks from now.
Well, that's what I'm saying is perhaps the survey is in motion in the private sector already.
Okay.
But
okay.
Once that survey is up and running in the private sector, we could bring it to this committee and recommend it to be given to the town to go through town channels to supplement that data collection, rather than flip-flopping it and having the town drive it, which by necessity would be a longer process. It seems like we've concluded that it would be helpful to the town to have access to whatever data is being generated in the private sector. The private sector can move more quickly. There's great recommendations here. Many of the people in this committee are tapped into that private sector conversation. That activity, by its very nature, will happen more quickly. But at our next meeting, we could have that survey, whatever it ends up being, that we could propose through this committee to be recommended to also be made available through town channels. Does that ride the appropriate boundaries between inviting the private sector to supplement the town's activities without kind of holding things up?
I'm comfortable with that. Any questions or concerns about that?
No, I just think it is important to get something up sooner rather than later. And then I like that idea for bringing it back to us and maybe adding to it for the town survey.
Okay. So then maybe we'll just make sure that is on the agenda for the next meeting and we'll circulate that draft ahead of time publicly so that folks can contribute comments and we can move it forward appropriately at the next meeting.
Okay. And for process, is Cato the keeper of the agenda as the clerk?
Ruth? You're muted.
Can't hear you, Ruth. Ruth, you have to unmute.
John, the chair sets the agenda.
Okay. All right, so Jennifer will set the agenda and then communicate that to Ruth. And then Ruth, do you, who actually asked the town to post our meetings?
The identified person, whether it's the chair or Ruth, would go to the town clerk, make sure it is posted 48 hours business day. Hey, that's an interesting thought, since we don't have business days anymore. Anyway, 48 hours, post and distribute the agenda to the town clerk as well as members of the committee. And I would say minutes should have the same circulation.
So just on top, yes to what Ruth said, but also add Jeremy Romanul is on this, as you can see, is on here. He's the Zoom keeper. And so in this remote time, it's important to copy him as well. And it's funny you say no business days, Ruth. I've been saying that every day is a Monday and a Saturday.
There you go. And both of them are long.
Yes. So include Jeremy with the agenda. If he can also post, but it should go to the clerk and copy him so he can set the meeting up.
Okay. So I think we have consensus on Jennifer's very nice kind of concise summary on the survey. What else is on people's minds? What other ideas should we be discussing?
John, do we want to discuss how frequently we meet as a group?
Let's do it. We originally were planning to meet once a month. Jennifer and I spoke earlier today, and I think we're thinking that if we could meet once every 2 weeks, at least for the next couple of months, until we have a little more clarity on what the schedule, what COVID schedule looks like, that we probably won't be short on topics to discuss. So how do folks feel about having a standing meeting every other Wednesday at noon for this committee. Dawn.
I think meeting more frequently is a great idea. I'm challenged with the midday meetings with the current shutdown because of working behind closed doors. It's a bit of a challenge, but I know the time was set early on when we were meeting once a month. I was wondering if anyone had any flexibility to meet even either earlier or later, or if that just upsets the whole plan.
So you raise a great question, Dawn, and I think unfortunately we won't see Deborah no matter what we do because she's just drowning. But yeah, maybe meeting in the middle of the business day, that worked well in the normal world, but I don't know. I mean, my schedule is more flexible, but is there a process? Is that going to topple the apple cart if we? Can we make it maybe either beginning of day or end of day?
Don, what would you prefer? What works for you?
Later in the day is great, but earlier also works. It's the middle right now I'm having challenges with.
Is 4 o'clock later in the day?
That works for me. But again, I don't want to upset the process.
How does 4 o'clock work as a standing time for these meetings on Wednesdays?
Works for me.
Works for me.
Is there anybody?
I need to see nods and twitches, please. Thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
Steve is good. Susan's good. Okay, Mark and Cato are all agreeing. Dawn is good.
Thank you all.
Okay, not terrific for Mark.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay. God, what a responsive committee. This is unbelievable. Very nice.
We need to have a formal motion to meet every other week at 4 p.m. for the interim.
I think I heard a motion.
Okay.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstained? Okay, motion passes, right?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Any other topics we want to cover? We had said the meeting was going to go, ordinarily they're going to be 1 hour. And maybe we should stick with that 1 hour for the standing meetings. We'd scheduled this one for an hour and a half because I wasn't sure how long we would need. We don't need to take the full hour and a half. But I do want to make sure that there are no other topics the committee wants to cover. And then if the committee is happy, then I think we should just open it up for any citizen comment before we break. So
can I just ask a question about the survey? So did you say you're going to send the survey around to all of us after the meeting?
And who was asking that question, please?
Sorry, Ruth, it's Cato.
Cato, okay.
We'll have to post a draft survey together with the agenda, right? 48 hours ahead of time so that the public has time to look at it as well.
Here's what I was asking, but I think he's asking if he's going to see a copy of the draft after this meeting.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned that maybe we're going to send something around after the meeting, and I guess the question would be, can we talk about it, over email, which I don't think we can, right? From an open
one-on-one, yes.
Well, I would avoid that. I would avoid deliberating it over email. And you don't need to have it posted with the agenda. I mean, materials get distributed at meetings regularly. It's nice so the public can see it to kind of post it with a packet, but it's not necessary.
So
here's the message.
Kind of to connect the answer to your question with the conversation we had before. The private channels in the town, the business partnership, the chamber, and this Concord Together group will collaborate and create a survey inevitably between now and the next meeting. Mm-hmm. That survey will ensure is made available to this committee to deliberate at our next meeting to determine if we want to recommend it to the town. Does that?
That's where I was going, but also sort of how we did with the topics for the meetings. Do we want to send, maybe survey questions to me as the clerk that we could talk about at the next meeting as well?
Okay.
Let me suggest can I suggest a process? I think that anyone in the committee who's not part of the chamber or the business partnership should send their suggestions to Cato. and Cato can gather questions on behalf of the committee. Others who are part of the chamber or the business partnership should send their comments to, I see Kate, partnership. If you could interface with partnership members, that would be great. And then likewise for the chamber, Jane, if any change, you have your process anyways, but if folks inside the chamber would like to have comment, then they could work with you. And that way it gets developed outside of this committee, but gets kind of, so it's handled principally by those two organizations. And then, they'll figure out how to get it out of the circulation.
John, just to make sure I understand, so I can take that survey and send it to the board members for comment and then redirect any comments I receive from them to Cato?
No.
So I think so. Just for completely full disclosure, for those who don't know, I've been the one for this Concord Together who's actually been drafting the survey. Okay. So, and I've been interfacing with others on that committee, which include chamber and partnership reps. I guess what I would propose to do is to continue to work within that Concord Together committee to finalize the survey with the representatives of the two business groups.
Which, just to be clear, Ruth, for your notes, that Concord Together committee is a private initiative, not affiliated with the town.
Yes, my notes are calling it an NGO.
Yes.
Beautiful. And so I would say let's leave it in the hands of Concord Together to finalize and get final input from the chamber, final input from the partnership. And then, as I said, if there's anyone on this committee who's not part of that membership, but not a member of one of those organizations, just shoot any questions you have to Cato, and Cato can send them to, I guess, to me in my capacity and Concord Together.
And then from there, that private initiative will finalize and execute a survey, and that survey will be made available to this committee at our next meeting, and we can deliberate as a town committee if we feel it is appropriate to recommend to the town to also push out through its channels to invite a larger participation from the business community.
Right.
Make sense? Stephen, does that sound okay with you for process?
Yeah, it just can't be a majority of members of this committee involved, even remotely involved in crafting the survey.
Okay. Great.
Good.
Okay. Do we want to open to public comment or questions?
Can I just make one more suggestion? Sorry, this kind of builds on what Mark was talking about. I just had a thought bubble. All of you have trade publications and business associations and other things that probably are represented at the federal level. I would just say if you get emails or alerts or something like that has data or has thoughts about what the new normal is going to look like or how people are going to reemerge, I would invite you to bring them to this committee or submit them to me directly, at least, because that's the type of information that's going to be also essential beyond our specific local impacts that it'll be harder for the town to access than it will be because we don't have lobbyists like the National Chamber does or the National Realtors Association does. So if you get that kind of information from your national groups, please include that in the mix, or maybe do at these meetings, do a round table where people report what they're hearing from their national associations. That's just a suggestion.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Public comment. Anybody have anything to add? I guess I'd like to take a moment and thank the public for joining. Not a lot of you, but your comments and input are always welcome. So thanks for taking the time to come to the meeting. All right. So I guess that means that our next meeting will be in 2 weeks at 4 p.m.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. Good discussion.
I believe that we need a roll call vote here because we're meeting remotely.
Vote.
So what does that mean, Ruth?
To adjourn.
To adjourn.
Oh, okay.
That's correct.
Mark's moving to adjourn. Cato second. Okay, Ruth, are you?
So the way to do that is
I see a Mark and a Beth, but I don't see nods and twitches.
So I think each person should actually Ruth could call the roll, and then each person would have to verbalize yes or no. The meeting is being recorded, and so it's good to the record should be somewhat formal. And I know you didn't do this on the previous motion to meet every other week, but that type of action doesn't really require a vote. So if you wanted to redo it by roll call, you could, but it doesn't really make any difference. But adjourn should have a roll call. And I think the best way, Ruth, is for you to call the roll.
Okay, I saw a motion in a second. Kate Carr, are you not a member? So I will continue. Jennifer?
Yes.
Stephen Verrill?
Aye.
Mark Martinez?
Yes, please.
Cato?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Dawn Renard?
Yes.
Jane O'Beggy?
Yes.
John Boynton?
Yes.
Beth Williams?
Yes.
And I don't see a Marcia. Is Marcia present?
He's there.
And Jeremy is present, but he is not a member. Okay. And that's it for my members. So I see unanimous vote by roll call.
So we are therefore adjourned.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Good to see
Thank
you
you,
all.
everyone.